So today's webinar is brought to you by Veriditas, and it's part of the Labyrinths in Higher Education Initiative. We're a committee here looking to raise awareness and support for the use of labyrinths in higher education. And this is our fourth webinar, which are provided free and available also on the Veriditas website at veriditas.org/higher-ed. You can see the other previous three webinars. This conversation today is born out of the Learning with the Labyrinth book, which was edited by Jan Sellers and Bernard Moss. And this chapter 2, Learning with the Labyrinth, was written by Stephen Terry and Dr. Jill Raggett, which is from which I'm basing our conversation today. So my name is Lars Howlett, and I am a designer and builder of labyrinths. I create classical, medieval, contemporary labyrinths, both indoors and out, for churches, schools, mental health centers, public parks, and private residences. I'm also a Veriditas faculty member and an advanced labyrinth facilitator. And I'm really delighted today to be talking to Stephen Terry. Stephen is a senior lecturer in landscape architecture and garden design at Writtle College in Essex, UK. And he works as a horticulturalist and garden designer, both in the UK and on travels abroad. So welcome.
Hi,
Stephen.
Thanks for having me this evening. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So right off the bat, I noticed in your bio and also in previous bios that I have is that you use the what you frame as a holistic approach to landscape design, and that's something that's similar to me. I've called myself a holistic labyrinth builder. So I'm interested to hear what is your understanding of holistic approach?
Wow, okay, thank you. That's quite a tricky one to start off with, really. I think in the UK, we have a good tradition of garden design, and actually landscape architecture is actually a subject area that's relatively new, and that's quite difficult for people to understand. We have difficulty even recruiting students because to get that message out there about what that is and what it entails, because it can be all encompassing. So the idea of an holistic approach is that landscape at a range of scales can encompass many things, and that can be social and ecological systems. So we're thinking about people, but we're also thinking about the environment, and we're thinking about that in its total capacity to hold what we want to do. And generally, we're trying to think about making landscapes that have resilience and that are good for people and good for the environment. And so we look at lots of different ways to do that. So we've got to engage with both the sciences and the arts and everything that kind of holds to create resilient, ecological and meaningful landscapes. I'm not sure if that's it in a nutshell, but that's what holistic kind of means for me.
Thanks. Yeah. I find it really fascinating because it's similar to, when I think of myself as a holistic labyrinth builder, I think that I'm not just creating an installation, as a construction, project, but that I am trying to form a relationship between the labyrinth and the landscape, between the labyrinth and the materials, that are being used, and then the labyrinth and the people that will be walking it. And then even broader things like the animals that surround it, the seasonal change, things of that nature. So, I see labyrinth building not just as a construction project, but as something that really draws upon, many areas of expertise and understanding and relationships.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, and today's webinar I entitled Centering Labyrinths in an Academic Environment. So I've had the chance to create 2 labyrinths recently in university settings, and what I found was interesting. One was at Middlebury College in Vermont, and another one was at Wellesley College in Massachusetts. And in both instances, it was the dean of religion and spiritual life that brought me to campus. And instead of creating the labyrinth in the chapel or next to the chapel, they both intentionally decided to place the labyrinth away from the chapel. In Middlebury College, we did it at the urban farm. It was actually outside of campus. And in Wellesley, we did it in the botanical gardens. So I think, you know, there's kind of an evolution in the understanding, or the, you know, how you center a labyrinth in the campus. And again, that's not something that's just like how you physically place the labyrinth in the campus, but energetically, where is it on the campus? And, you know, who is next to it, or what is next to the campus? What are you tying the labyrinth to? Are you anchoring it to the chapel, or are you anchoring it to the garden? And so what I'm really interested to learn from you today is, you know, how at Writtle University, you know, you had from what my experience in the United States is, a very different approach in bringing the labyrinth to campus, because here in the US, often, you know, most of the university campus labyrinths we see are permanent labyrinths, you know, tied to the chapel or the chaplaincy. And so I think this will be an interesting conversation to see, you know, what other ways and considerations and opportunities exist, you know, for creating labyrinths in an academic environment.
Hmm. Well, it's quite interesting perhaps to start by saying that our original intention was to have an artist work at the college and not necessarily to have a labyrinth.
Right.
So, you know, with this particular audience, you know, interesting things happen from just interesting connections. And I think the story of how our labyrinth began was back in the year 2000. There was the idea that the Arts Council in the UK wanted to place artists in residence, an artist in residency program in 1,000 places, 1,000 unusual places across the country. And Jill Raggett, my friend and colleague, and I were very interested in the landscape and its relationship to the arts, and how we could think about using the arts and arts methodologies to think about developing a landscape sensitivity and sensibility in our students, and also the staff of Writtle College, as it was then. And so we put out a call for artists to come and spend a 6-week residency with us. So it was a program that invited artists to think about how they might benefit their own careers, their own professional practice, by working with us as a university, and considering the idea that we were a land-based university, thinking about all the things that the land can support. So so we ended up going through a series of interviews with a range of different artists, and decided to select a person that's maybe known to you in the States, as he's done some work over there, Jim Buchanan, who was particularly known for labyrinths at that time, but who wanted to extend his own artistic practice. So he came to join us on a 6-week residency, and actually his interest at that time was in soil, and how soil could be used as an artistic medium. So we allowed Jim to live on campus. We have 400 students who are resident on campus. We're a small university college, but we have around 2,000 to 3,000 students at any one time, full or part-time, and we have 400 residents. Wow. So that allowed Jim to actually engage with the students and the staff, you know, for a period of time, a considerable period of time. And that allowed him to do lots of different experiments, lots of projects. And actually out of that, and we'll probably talk more a little bit about that, the labyrinth became just one of the legacies that he left with us. So we had the potential and the grounds, we have 220 hectares, for Jim to experiment in the landscape. And as I say, the labyrinth was one of the legacies of that.
Yeah, that's great. So it's a really interesting entry point. So yeah, the labyrinth doesn't always start as the initial concept. It was just kind of the this idea of the 1,000 artists and residents, and then, you know, seizing that opportunity created an opening for something else to emerge, which, you know, the Labyrinth was one part of that process.
Yeah, that's right. The Labyrinth became a vehicle for our students to understand lots of things. I mean, you mentioned talking about centering the Labyrinth. You can center the Labyrinth pedagogically, or in a practical way, or in an environmental way when we're making them out of temporary and sustainable materials. So we kind of used it as a vehicle for lots of workshops, but also to help the students to see quite quickly, in terms of landscape design and landscape production, how they could have some impact. And that's a physical impact, but that's also an environmental impact. So it's great that you're showing some photos here. Would you like me to explain a little bit about some of these?
Yeah, I think this is great to really get a sense of the projects that came forward, and I chose some of the photos that you sent to include and help you know, people to visualize what's going on. Yeah.
So this is we call this our amenity barn, and this is normally where we house our tractors and our vehicles, and also our tools for horticultural practices out in the landscape. But it's also where we have materials that we can use. You can see there's some bricks here, and there's some sand. And, you know, we were working with groups of students, not just landscape architecture and garden design students, but we had some interior architecture students at that time. We had horticulturists. And actually, we used to open up a module which was entitled Landscape Gardens and the Arts across the college. Any student could take that. And we had students that were doing equine studies, but also agriculture, coming and joining us just to think about possibilities of landscape. And so this is a fun afternoon where students came together, and using sand or bricks as a drawing material, we were actually drawing out a range of labyrinths. And, you know, what better way for students to make mistakes, rub out the labyrinth with a broom and start again. You know, it's a really cheap and easy way, using materials that you have to hand, to help students think about laying out, thinking mathematically, and then using the labyrinth, you know, for an experience where people come together and have fun. I mean, I'd challenge anyone to think about, you know, a more involving and exciting project, really, where students can just have some fun in an afternoon.
Yeah, this is brilliant. I see it as a kind of a walkable chalkboard, you know, instead of drawing designs on a wall or paper, you know, here the students are actually drawing them and creating them on the ground, and they're able to directly engage in the material and to create, you know, full-size walkable labyrinths, but also, as you said, to experiment, to make mistakes or variations, adaptations, you know, immediately, and then to share in that with the other students. And then I guess they all probably walked each other's labyrinths at the end as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, so there's that exchange. And also, as you know, each labyrinth has a different meaning, has a different feeling. Some take much longer to walk than others. So there's a real sense of comparison and, you know, what you can actually do with a line in landscape.
Yeah, and to be able to walk through different designs, I think is really interesting study. You know, often a university will just create one single labyrinth, and that will be the solitary experience. But, you know, here it's like you've given students the opportunity to compare different designs and their experiences.
So this, sorry, a couple of photos ago, that there was a labyrinth there that actually was designed that you could dance around.
Oh,
So the
wow.
students had a lot of fun. You know, Jim was actually the master of engaging students and, you know, helping them learn through the fun activity. So, you know, some labyrinths, of course, are, you know, you give yourself over to the journey. It's a very meditative experience, but some of them are, you know, quite exciting and fun and make you laugh. So just the way that we used them really, I think, embedded the learning.
That's great. Yeah, that you don't just walk a labyrinth, that you can dance it, or you can, you know, walk it holding hands with other people, or you could do it blindfolded, or, you know, yeah, that's great.
What's nice about this image that's up on the screen now is that, you know, when you sweep it away, what was lovely was this ghostly after image as well, as the damp sand kind of soaked into this polished concrete floor. And of course that's going to fade over time, but it's really lovely to think about how, you know, we do still have an impact whatever we do. And this was quite a light impact, but that got us thinking about the way that we use materials in the landscape, how we might use them sensitively. So this is all fertile ground for us to talk to our students about those issues.
Yeah, right. Even when you think you're not making an impact, that it is only a temporary design, you see that there are, you know, lasting effects even after you remove the labyrinth, which is the same even on a grass. You know, I've staked up temporary labyrinths in grass, and then it's there for a week. You pull up all the stakes, but then you can still see where everybody's walked because they've tread down the path. Yeah.
You kind of comb it in a direction.
Yeah. So do you want to share about this image? This is a drawing that Jim Buchanan created.
Yes, this is one of the outcomes of the project, one of the requirements for the project. And Jim had fantastic artistic skills as well. He trained as a landscape architect before. He engaged in more artistic practices. One of the outcomes from the time he spent here was we required him to keep a record of his process. And that's something that is very important for landscape architects and garden designers, to understand design process and the process in which they might engage with landscape and indeed with people. So at key stages, he was creating a record. And although most of his work here was thinking about the structural qualities and sculptural potential of soil, one of the legacies I think that the students really wanted him to leave was a labyrinth here. And so this is a record of his thoughts, and you can see there's an image on the right hand side at the top, and that's where he would be working and instructing students to create the turf labyrinth out in the grounds, our campus grounds of Writtle University College. And there's the students marking them out with a spray can at the bottom, and this was the 4-point labyrinth that he wanted to create. It's slightly adapted from this image, as most designs are, as you work through the ideas. But that was it was a fantastic image actually, and it really helped set up the expectation in the students about what they would do. And this was the labyrinth. So this was sited in a part of the campus, which was on the edge of. Here we go. We can see it at the bottom here. This is the heart of our campus. These are our teaching buildings, our halls of residence, and our ornamental gardens in the centre there. You can see we've got kind of like a parkland setting, and as we go further out across the college, we go into our agricultural land and our research plots. Because we cover a range of arts and science-based courses, the landscape is a kind of reflection of that. And at the very bottom there, you can see our labyrinth. And it's a single line. It appears as 2 paths, but you walk in on one of those paths and it takes you around the labyrinth to encounter at that time, on the 4 points, some sculptures that Jim and had created along with some of those sculptures. And there's a little sculpture in the background, a pillar, which was actually built as a chimney, and students used to have barbecues up there. They used to cook food in there. So this really was, not only was the labyrinth part of the studies for the students, but the labyrinth in the state that you see it there with the columns were actually part of a symposium that we had called Sculpting the Landscape with Soil. So we used it for all the delegates to come out and explore some of Jim's findings, as well as talking about the value of topsoil and subsoil. Topsoil particularly, quite a finite resource. Mm-hmm. So as we move through a couple of the other photos here, this was a summer school that we ran for some teenagers, hoping that they would be attracted to higher education, not necessarily here, but just helping them think about their future lives, career paths. And so the Labyrinth was used as part of a wider idea of designing a festival site where the students would design all the spaces and then actually celebrate the spaces at the end of the week. And you can see Jim here leading the group of youngsters around the Labyrinth. So they're having a lot of fun there.
Yeah, well, it's great that Labyrinths can create space for other events, you know, celebrations, happenings, you know, and that you created this invitation for a summer school to create their own celebration on the Labyrinth. That's really a great idea.
Yeah, the Labyrinth actually was completed in 2001. So as a temporary labyrinth, it's actually had quite some longevity. And of course, in education, resources are finite and often tight. And if you've got an asset like this, you find ways to use it to find ways to apply the learning in different ways to different age groups. We often have an annual event. It was called Groundbreakers in the past. It's now called Food and Farming, where we invite school children from all over the region to come, up to 3,000 students sometimes. Wow. And in the past, they've often all walked the Labyrinth. So that's great. You know, not only do they get to learn about food, where it comes from, their environment, but they have a lot of fun while they're doing it. A much younger me there. And I'm the one in the background, not in the foreground.
Going for a jog on the Labyrinth.
In the Labyrinth. Yeah. I mean, it was a real pleasure to put these photographs together for you, because not only was the artist in residence program really successful and memorable for lots of reasons, but I've been lucky to continue to work here and to use the Labyrinth and use it in lots of different times of the years, see it in very different conditions. And here we've got this beautiful meadow behind, blue skies in the summer. And, you know, you'll also go out perhaps very early in the morning where the mist is just hanging over the field.
Yeah, I really liked what was.
Yeah, so the idea of having a labyrinth made out of natural materials in a setting where you're able to experience nature at different times is really beneficial for anyone, I think, not just for the students on our courses.
Yeah, and I love what was written in the book here. It says, conditions vary, you know, whether on sunny days when the soil is dry or wet days when it is muddy. Children race around the path, often puffing and tired when they reach the end, getting fit without even realizing.
Yeah.
Every school should have a labyrinth for fitness and well-being, a tool to tackle obesity with fun. Yeah. We discuss these issues and ideas with our own design and horticultural students. So, yeah, because you don't think of it necessarily as a fitness activity, but it does get you out, you know, out and about, moving. And
here we go. Here we are in winter, a misty day.
Yeah, misty day in winter, and another different group, right?
Another different group. Yeah, this is well, probably about 10 years ago, I would say. I can remember most of those students. And you can see there's been an addition to it, actually, as the towers have disappeared and fallen over. You know, other students have come out as part of our environmental art program. They've created, you know, a willow structure here. And what's really useful for me as a landscape architecture tutor is to help my students understand about spatial design. You know, how much space can, what capacity does it have to hold people? So, you know, a line in a landscape, look how many people that could hold. I think our labyrinth is about 230 meters. So in relatively small space, you can get quite a long walk. And here, you know, they're crammed into a Willow Dome just for fun here. But actually you can create different entrance ways, different ways to explore nature with different materials.
Yeah, well, that's a great idea, I think, for a college or university that had a permanent labyrinth that wanted to kind of reawaken people's awareness of the labyrinth, would be to create other temporary sculptures or things around the labyrinth, or even on the labyrinth,
Yes.
to kind of reawaken students that have just passed by the same place, day after day, and then all of a sudden there's this like hut, or all of a sudden there's a tower or
Yeah.
flags that have been created, around the space.
We often talk about program and what happens not only where but when. So it's important to think where you might site your labyrinth, but it's also to think about how you could use it and in what way at particular times of the year. Of course, there were people that will want to use it individually for meditation and maybe exercise, but there's also times in the year for celebration, and where people come together. Maybe it's to celebrate a module, or maybe it's to celebrate the end of the year, or even the start of the year.
Right.
It's kind of an ice-breaking exercise. So it's important to think when as much as where.
And part of that is centering the labyrinth, but centering it in an event, or centering it in a season or a calendar moment. Centering it on the first day of students arriving. That's another way to center the labyrinth.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. And then I think this is the last picture of this labyrinth. Is kind of this is what it looks like today.
This is what it looks like today, yeah. And you can see that the pathways are starting, or have been for a long time now, colonized by other plants. So we manage this by mowing it. And it also brings up other issues. How do you maintain a vegetative community, an ecological community? What happens when the labyrinth starts to disappear? Is that okay? Is it time to build a new one, or do you resurrect this, and how do you do that? So I've been having conversations recently with the grounds manager and horticulture staff to think about, we don't really want to spray the labyrinth. We're creating this wonderful environment for people to be in. The last thing we want to be using is chemicals on it. So how do we actually maintain it? Do we dig it again, or do we use a burner, which again uses fossil fuels? So all those things, it's making me rethink my relationship with the landscape. So as faculty, as staff, what we might have done in terms of landscape and as stewards of our landscape is constantly changing.
And I had a similar experience at Wellesley College, where I created a labyrinth out of wood rounds, cut pieces of branches and trees, and it created a temporary labyrinth for about 2 years, but then it began to decay, to the point where it was entirely covered in mushrooms, and there was this debate, like, should we clean off all the mushrooms, or do we just? But it was so beautiful with the mushrooms, and so we decided just to leave it, and instead of trying to maintain that labyrinth in the condition it was pretty much impossible, because it was wood and it was decaying. That then we decided to create a new labyrinth in another place and let the old labyrinth just kind of sink back into the ground.
It becomes habitat, and that might be important. So that's one of the things that landscape architects and garden designers, we have to help them appreciate that. And an artwork can be ephemeral. An artwork doesn't have to last forever. Or a labyrinth doesn't have to last forever. What
are these now, the next kind of phase of the labyrinth on campus?
So this was part of another series of Jim's experiments. You can see, you might just be able to see a circle of stones in the center, and a labyrinth form under the sheen of this water. And that's one of the ghostly after images of a sand labyrinth that was swept away, which then Jim decided to seal around the edge and flood, to experiment with the ideas of projecting labyrinths, or floating labyrinths, or swimming around labyrinths, and splashing around labyrinths. And actually that became the focus of another conference that we held a few years later. And that one was art and architecture. Some of the things that happen in education happens at the boundaries of disciplines. So we held a conference thinking about how we could bring art and architecture together. how one discipline or industry could support the other. And the most practical things might be how artists can think to support to sell products, or designers can help that, or maybe more creatively, you know, how we could share the landscape for artistic endeavors as well as agricultural endeavors. We have to start thinking more holistically, again, that word again, about how we use our landscapes and how it can benefit, not just stave off hunger, but benefit society and help with general well-being. So, you know, there was a real cross-pollination of ideas that day. And the labyrinth in our barn, we have a fantastic 16th century barn, there we go, was used as the site for people to come together and discuss these ideas and just have some fun. It created beautiful reflections on the ceiling. You can see the ribs of the barn. And this was the one that we did in our landscape building. So you can see some fantastic reflections there. So the labyrinth in the barn came out of the ideas of that were experimented here.
Yeah, and I was listening to an interview with Jim, another podcast, and I think he mentioned that, you know, he had been working in monumental earthworks, you know, that were really solid and intense in the landscape, and then he decided to push himself in the opposite direction and try to create the most delicate form that he could create. And so, you know, here by just working with water, you know, very thin, you know, and light, you know, you have this very delicate form that then is disturbed, you know, by walking in it, by the shadows, you know, and it's only meant to last for an evening instead of, you know, for years, you know, or through a cycle of seasons. So well, it's great that you had both of these experiences on campus.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that came out from, you know, as I mentioned, my friend and colleague Jill Raggett, was that we were always thinking about that sensitivity, treading lightly on the landscape. And actually, if you leave a legacy of permanent works, that can actually end up becoming almost like landscape litter. We have a new cohort of students every year. We want that experience to be fresh for them. So build something new, tread lightly, do it again, but choose a different material, choose a different location, choose something that will disappear gently back into the landscape so you can do it again another year. We don't actually need to think about hard landscaping materials all the time. There is a place for that, of course, but actually in pedagogic terms, we can do just as valuable things, you know, with scant resources and actually working with nature. That's really, really important. The image that's on screen now is Jill and I were lucky enough to work with a sister university, Dalhousie in Nova Scotia. We went and delivered a module in a condensed form where we worked with maple leaves in Canada. So, you know, what could be better? Yeah. So we worked with students to think, you know, obviously we were there in the fall, in autumn, and we said, how can we use your landscape and how can it reflect where we are? Again, sense of place, a sense of the local is really important. And in this project, we actually we raked the leaves together, and then with students, we put out paper bags with some sand in the bottom and tea lights, and the students lit them. There's almost, you know, a procession of lighting, so you can dance around it at night. It's a fantastic experience for the students to celebrate the event.
Beautiful. Yeah.
This is a similar project that we did instantaneously. I happened to have a group of students and it started to snow, so we ran outside and we just made a labyrinth. It's nice to be spontaneous if you can in your learning. There we go. Just covered in snow gently there.
Great, yeah. And then here, these are in Finland, is that correct?
Yes, Finland, yeah. So similar, we were again on another international program, an Erasmus exchange. We were tasked by the people in Halme Polytechnic in Finland to help not only the international students that came on this program, but their own Finnish students to see their landscape again. So we, again, employed the labyrinth form, and this time we made it from birch leaves. So again, another signifier of place. And again, they lit it, they walked it, they had a fantastic event. I think actually, we didn't know how many students we were going to be teaching. We thought there was going to be 30. There were about 60 when we turned up here. So to allow a group of that size to all give them a task, the Labyrinth was a fantastic resource to be able to do that. We probably had 20 using rakes to rake the leaves. We had 20 probably filling bags and 20 lighting them, and everyone celebrating.
Well, that's great. That's a real great example of bringing, you know, this diverse student population from all over Europe, you know, here for this experience, and then to engage them all in one collective project, you know, where they can each do their own job and have a hand in the creation of a labyrinth, but then they can share in the experience of creating a single work, and then engaging and walking that, you know, as a group together at the end.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it was one of, the most memorable things that we did there. The students all made their own environmental artworks as well, but as a way of using this collective endeavour to help them engage with the landscape. I think, again, then they didn't feel so shy about doing it on their own.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, get their wheels turning, and yeah.
Someone really engaging with the labyrinth there.
Yeah, you don't just need to walk the labyrinth. You can lay down in it and study it up close. Yeah,
absolutely.
And then this, I think, is the one that we have the most images of from start to finish. So you can kind of see the process here.
Yeah. So, this is a mown landscape. You can see where the lawnmower has been over that. But here we've got people beginning. This is a real team building exercise as well. You issue people with a set of instructions and you're there to guide. But actually, it's really interesting to see who takes the lead, who's a team player, all those things that, we're trying to build those soft skills in students, not just the subject knowledge. But they really start to come out, and sometimes the students find a voice, and they find their place in this kind of exercise. Here we go. People are collecting leaves and laying them out on the lines that we've scribed on the land. So we're just drawing with sticks, and you create this fantastic thing.
Yeah, and making your own tools, you know, adapting your technique, and finding your place in the group.
You see a huddle there in the middle, just against.
Yeah, it's hard to see, but there's a group sitting there.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to get students to leave when you've done this kind of thing. They then want to celebrate all night. So they'll go back to their rooms. They'll bring back guitars. They'll sit. It's a real event. And on the next day, of course, you clear the bags away. We always make a point of going back and seeing the consequence of our impact on the landscape. We clear away any potential litter, which is really only the tea lights, because the sand can be brushed into the lawn almost like a top dressing. And then the leaves will just gently return to the landscape. They'll blow away gently. And the only thing that's really left is what you mentioned earlier, is the combing of the grass as people have shuffled around it, and it leaves that pattern. So again, that lovely after image.
That's great. Yeah, here's another one.
We're back in Canada.
Oh, whoops. Got slightly out of order.
It's okay. It's nice to jet set.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're in the last 5 minutes here of our talk, and then we can have some questions and answers. So if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask in the Q&A box on the bottom of their screen, that you can type in a question, and we'll see if we have 10 minutes for questions. And this will be the kind of, we'll go through another 5 minutes here about the lasting legacy at Writtle.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Happy to answer any questions. This is another spontaneous spiral, I should say, rather than a labyrinth. And, you know, we're walking on dew on the grass. So, you know, this is just going to evaporate, this one. And some of the students have made some out of cherry blossom petals. I mean, I think that's quite poetic.
Yeah, beautiful.
So how transient is that going to be? That's going to blow away very, very gently.
Yeah, but it does reawaken your awareness to the petals, and then I love how the spiral kind of comes right off the pathway. It's almost like, you know, the road less traveled, you know, from this student path to go off into the grass and immerse yourself in the petals and the beauty of spring, and end up, you know, basically face to face with the tree. So
absolutely, yeah. So about connecting in lots of different ways and lots of different levels, actually.
Yeah, and so what has the lasting impact of the labyrinth, even if the labyrinth maybe fades back into the landscape? You know, how has the labyrinth kind of left an impact, both, you know, in the students, but also the faculty, and then in the academic program?
So yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Annually, I still use the labyrinth with my students in a particular module. And that's a module called Spatial Design Studies. I kind of feel that that's one of the most fundamental things that students have to learn, students of landscape architecture and garden design. They have to understand how space has the capacity to hold, maybe to capture, maybe to heal in terms of the labyrinth. But equally, as there seems to be a awakening awareness again of mental health issues in students, only recently I walked the labyrinth with our health and wellbeing team here at the college, hoping to kind of help them to use it with students who might be experiencing, you know, anxiety for whatever reason, not just being in the academic environment, but sometimes students come into the college with problems, and maybe the labyrinth can go part way to healing or helping with that. But again, there are lots of opportunities. So maybe it's my job to share it with more faculty again, to think how they might use it in their teaching.
Yeah, so new entry points for bringing the labyrinth back. I think mental health and wellness is definitely a rising topic, you know, in the United States especially. And I know that at Wellesley College, that, you know, it's been a part of the reason for putting in the labyrinth is to create a space for mental health, because it's becoming such a high stress environment, you know, for students. So yeah, great. Well, let's see. So we do have a question here from Catherine McLean. She says, thank you so much for sharing this generative work. Have you developed any resources that might be shared with other colleges or universities about how you have integrated the labyrinth into the life of the students and faculty and community?
Okay. I think, well, in Jan's excellent book, Jill and I wrote a chapter on, we called it Treading Lightly on the Landscape. Yeah. So that chapter is in there. I recommend you read all the chapters in there.
Yeah, this is a great resource.
We haven't actually produced many other resource packs or things like that, other than actually the conferences that were integral to our practice early on. So we ran some conferences, art and agriculture, and also space to work was another one, and soil as a sculptural medium. So, but also if you look at kind of our social media pages, and maybe I can send you the details of that later. We have a Facebook page. You'll often see students of ours working not just with the labyrinth, but with creating environmental artworks and installations. We actually now have a course called Art and the Environment, which encompasses people thinking about landscape and also floristry. So actually creative, making things with natural materials. So yeah, if you tap into our social media sites, there's lots of resources there that people can hopefully be inspired by and get some ideas from.
Yeah, and social media is another way to kind of to help raise awareness for the labyrinth, you know, to have it featured on the social media, but also to see, you know, what students, if they're posting about it or sharing any of their experiences, because it is such a graphic thing to photograph, you know, that the labyrinth can become something that that students are sharing on their own to each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, Jan Sellers, she has a question here. She says, "Hi, Steve, greetings from London. Would love to know how you worked with students to create the labyrinth in the dew without spoiling it with extra foot marks. It looks really delicate. Thanks."
Yeah, I think it was one of those moments where we were out and we were trying to assess the site for the students' individual works. And we just noticed that it was a heavy dew that morning, and we kind of had to say, right, stop. We want someone to lead a procession, and you know, someone will take the role of the leader, and we say, right, we would like you to walk in and create a pattern, and they decided on that pattern.
Oh.
And then at some point we had to say, now we need to turn around and carefully walk out on
Yeah,
the path that we've made. So yeah, so you know, that was just a bit of fun. But yeah, what's nice about that little spiral, that labyrinthine form, was that our library actually has a first floor which we could go up and we could view down. So we all then viewed what we'd done in, you know, what took 10 minutes. But I think it's looking for those opportunities with the environment all the time.
Yeah, well, it creates a little mini lesson there. You know, first is like deciding on your intention and what you're going to do, and then, you know, you create the spiral, but then you have this question of, well, now how do we get out of it? And then, you know, then you're actually rewalking the thing that you've just created, you know, and then you go back and you observe it from afar and you kind of take it in on the whole and consider it, you know, from like your third eye. So that's great, and such a simple, you know, thing. But
yeah. I mean, I'm already immediately thinking, you know, we're thinking not only about space, but we're thinking about time. You know, we're thinking about creating a labyrinthine form in the moment, but actually how many thousands of years has the labyrinth been with us?
Right.
You know, so there are discussions that we can kind of tease out of that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So one last question I have is kind of bringing us back to the beginning about centering the labyrinth in campus, and you know, college campuses are such a diverse environment. You know, in terms of age, you have the students, and you have the teachers and faculty, and staff as well. And then you also have public coming onto the site, and then you have people in different disciplines, and then people from different backgrounds, you know, social backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds. And, you know, how does the labyrinth, you know, what is the potential for creating a common ground, you know, that can create these cross-discipline conversations and experiences that are between different types of people on a campus?
Yeah, good question. The labyrinth has great potential to bring people together, first and foremost, but people come with their own opinions and approaches and biases to landscape and landscape use. That's something that our students of landscape architecture and garden design have to work with when they are out in the professional world. So sometimes that's collective and collegiate, and sometimes there's conflict there because we have quite a large campus and we're very lucky and proud to have that. And yet there's competition for, you know, particular valuable research or activities in the landscape. And it would be wrong of me not to say that I haven't had to defend the labyrinth over my 20 years of its existence.
Yeah.
But that's okay, because again, it's at the center of our discussions. We have to defend and we have to justify and we have to say why it's important. The future, we have to show the future, the current and the future potentials. And that's true of anyone in any landscape or even any interior resource as well. So I think it's very valuable to think of it as a site of contestation as well. It's not just this spiritual thing that everyone accepts. But
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think once those discussions are happening, and if you are able to show and evaluate by speaking to those who have used it, or to think about the importance of where it is, then I think maybe you're halfway there to begin to justify it. Because I would say there are some people that may have been cynical about it before they've started using the Labyrinth, but certainly once they've used it, if you are able to encourage them to use it, they begin to see the benefits. And some of those are intangible and difficult to explain.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, I think that's a site for for discussion.
Yeah, I often think that, even if the Labyrinth doesn't resonate with you on a day, or when you first introduced to it, then, maybe there will be a day in your life where the Labyrinth does resonate, just because today nothing happened or you found it to be frustrating doesn't mean that on another time in another place in your life, or something happening, or in a group, or in a different environment with music or lights, there's so many different ways to experience the Labyrinth, to realize that it's not just a one and done type of thing, but if you can just continually try to bring people back into the experience, and I think that's what's so inspiring about your work at Writtle College, is that you've created so many different entry points to the Labyrinth, and then so many different types of labyrinths and so many different materials and locations, that it really creates multiple opportunities for people to encounter the Labyrinth, and then to decide whether or not they're going to take that first step on the journey.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. We had a really great talk. I really enjoyed this, and appreciate all that you've shared, your wonderful images, and your insights and experience. So look forward to keeping in touch with you, and hope everyone who was able to join us, thank you for taking your time to join us here on the webinar. And we will be creating the video and sending it out to those who have registered, and then posting it on the Veriditas website for posterity as well.
It was absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for contacting us again, and thank you to the host, Veriditas. And Lars, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And hopefully, who knows, maybe we can all work together in the future. So thank you very much.
Oh yeah, it'd be my joy. I said that if I had to go back to school and study, and I'd want to be a landscape architect. I think that's the one degree that if I could go back, maybe and do it all over again, that's what I would have studied. Realizing where I am today. So yeah, I should put in an application to to be your next student. That's for sure.
It will come to me. So you've we've had a few already.
Great. All right. Well, thank you very much. And thanks, Dawn and Annika and everyone at Veriditas for hosting this webinar, and the Higher Education Committee initiative for putting this together.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you for your questions.